we want money because it's a gateway to, it's the tool, the means of exchange we've all agreed on to meet our needs. And, for a wealthy life, money doesn't actually always get us all the things that really, if we really slowed down and thought each individually, what does a wealthy life look like to me? Money isn't always going to correlate to all of those things. It certainly provides a foundation, kind of like the solid base to work off of. But it's not necessarily a guarantee that money is happiness.
Hey, it's Rocky. Welcome to Richer Soul. Today's guest is Laura Oldanie, who's going to chat about wealth from a very different viewpoint. Imagine it's 12 months from now, and you've achieved your major life goals. How does it feel to be in the best shape of your life? To wake up energized, excited about the day? To have great relationships and friends who support you and propel you forward? How does it feel to have an excess of money, to be able to make the choices you want? To be fearless and open to trying new adventures? Imagine being connected to the universe and it providing everything you desire. It's possible over time, and your past does not dictate your future. The only thing holding you back from this vision is you. It's time to take control of our thoughts and use them to our advantage. Welcome to Richer Soul, where we achieve our dreams and create harmony to health, wealth, relationships, time, and spirituality. If you have not had a chance to listen to episodes 1 through 9, I encourage you to go back and listen to the framework behind Richer Soul and how to create the life of your dreams. You can also find all the show notes for this episode at richersoul.com. Today's quote is from Alan Watts, and it's from her book. In music, one doesn't make the end of a composition the point of the composition. If that were so, the best conductors would be those who played fastest, and there would be composers who wrote only finales. People would go to the concert just to hear one crashing chord, because that's the end. But that's not something we see in the education system. Then, when you wake up one day at about 40 years old, you say, "My God, I've arrived, I'm here." And you don't feel very different from what you've always felt. And there's a slight letdown because you feel there's a hoax. And there was a hoax, a dreadful hoax. They made you miss everything. We thought of life by analogy with a journey, with a pilgrimage which had a serious purpose at the end. And the thing was to get to the end. Success or whatever it is, or maybe heaven after you're dead, but we missed the point. The whole way along. It was a musical thing, and we were supposed to sing or dance while the music was being played. Are you living on the journey, or are you waiting to be on the mountaintop? This is why we talk about harmony, because life is in the music, and different parts play in your song, and you've got to enjoy them and play the different parts when they come up, at the moment they're there. Our focus today is on being more resourceful and stepping away from cultural norms. If you've ever been outside the country, you'll see how different other people live and how they don't need a lot. We tend to throw money at problems that we are told we have, but they really aren't problems in the scheme of things. What do they say now? It's a first world problem. Wealth is about more than just money. And our guest will share many other forms of wealth today. Laura Oldanie is a green living and money coach who blogs at Rich and Resilient Living, where she helps reluctant capitalists achieve financial stability on a climate-challenged planet in ways that don't negate the very future for which they are preparing. Laura is a sought-after source of knowledge on regenerative investing and has been featured in CNBC, Good Housekeeping, and Forbes. She recently co-authored her first book, Growing Free, Financially Resilient, Economically Empowered, Build the Life of Your Dreams Without Losing Your Soul or Destroying the Planet. Let's meet Laura. Welcome to Richer Soul, Laura Oldanie. It's great to have you join us today.
Thank you. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
I am excited about it as well. We always like to start at the beginning. What was it like when you were growing up, and how much did your family and school teach you about money?
Well, I grew up in a pretty middle-class Americana type setting where, riding bikes, lemonade stands in suburbia, before cell phones and social media. I will say the one, I think, distinctive factor that I didn't appreciate then, but has really subtly set the trajectory for me is that at the age of 11, I was diagnosed with scoliosis and ended up wearing a Milwaukee brace from the age of 11 to 15. And so despite this very strong longing to belong and fit in, it kind of got taken away from me because I looked different. I had this plastic metal brace coming up to my neck. It came down to my waist. My clothes fit me funny. There was no way to not be a little different from everyone else for a certain part of my childhood. So I think as we have this conversation, what I'm saying is it kind of pushed me into nonconformity early on. And that has, I think, shaped my thinking throughout the years. In terms of the financial lessons, again, growing up middle class with parents that grew up, in working class settings. So first generation college. My dad ended up going into real estate in an area that was declining economically. So I think there was stress, around money. We never, struggled financially overtly. We were able to have a ski trip here or there, vacations. So the specific money lessons that I remember in my childhood actually came from my mom. I remember sitting down and, going to the bank with her, getting a savings account, going over the savings book, writing in my deposits, being taught how to write a check, use a checkbook and track my spending. And later in my later years in college and early adulthood, my mom joined a women's investing group called the Money Mamas. And so, there were certainly, I came through my youth with this subtle message of fiscal responsibility. And I definitely grew up somehow as a result of this with a very strong aversion to debt. I wanted to go off and have adventures, and I didn't want to be hindered by debt to stop me from my adventures. And another thing that I will say that plays into this as well is my household. My parents are very community oriented. My mom ended up spending much of her career as an administrator in hospice. And there's been lots of volunteerism around church and Habitat for Humanity and other nonprofits in my life. And so that longing for adventure and this sense of community service led me to join the Peace Corps after college. And I spent 3 years in Poland teaching English in a high school, and then stayed on for a 4th year and studied Polish culture at a university. And really did not want to be, hindered by debt. There was so much of the world to see and so much adventure to have that it kept me from wanting to take that on.
That's quite interesting. And I would say being in hospice, you see the end of life. And so you see essentially all the mistakes other people made and the things that they didn't do. And so then you have a choice of saying, now that I know what do I want to do different with my life? And how do I want to live it differently? Did that kind of come through to you from that, or?
I think to some extent, now that you're asking, yes, I think the way it came through is, hearing the stories of, how the interactions people were having in their last days, who they wanted to be with, what were the conversations that they were having, what were the regrets that they were sharing. Certainly that got passed down to me, filtered in dinner time conversations with my parents. So, starting to shape priorities around what do people regret later and what's really worth emphasizing now before I get there and regret it.
Well, that's good. These are the lessons we need to learn that too often we don't. Poland also has very different attitudes towards money. I don't know if when you were there, you noticed any of that and how they kind of behave different than we do here in the U.S.
Certainly. I couldn't help but notice. Well, when I went to Poland, I was there initially with the Peace Corps from 1993 to 1996. And I lived in a small village of 5,000 people. And I couldn't help but be struck, as so many Americans are when we travel to, countries with lower incomes than the United States, at how rich and beautiful their lives can still be, and how they are so much more resourceful and just think about things differently. My respect for gardening, even though my grandparents had always grown tomatoes and some things in their yards, really came from Poland, because not only was it food growing in plots, that they weren't even on their own property because so many of them lived in apartments, but also if they did live in a home, their yards, how the flowers, just the maintaining their lawns and the beauty and the color that it added. So that kind of what the multi-generational living, obviously that was for economic reasons. It was really hard to get a flat. But having all of those benefits of multi-generational living, with the child care from the elderly and then the care for the elders from the younger generations, there's tremendous financial benefit, and the wisdom, we could have a whole separate conversation about retirement planning and aging in this country, where we focus so much only on money. And I think that retirement planning needs a revamp. There are conversations about how to age well, but I think we could do so much more to think more strategically as we're planning for retirement about what we want our lives to look like. How do we build the relationships early on? How do we build the foundation of good health? We put ourselves in this spiral of working so hard early on to earn money to fund our healthcare and retirement. Whereas if we had taken care of our health early on, you can't guarantee nothing's going to happen, but you may well not end up needing all that money, or you may just be causing those health issues that you're saving money to deal with later.
It's funny. One of the biggest issues that's coming up today is young people getting on their feet, young people with kids, and the cost of childcare and having to make ends meet. And if people lived back into multi-generational families, most of those problems would be manageable.
Much more so. It certainly takes skills and more open communication than we Americans have become used to, but it's doable, and it is a very financially viable option. I think there's a lot of work we can do to remove the stigma around it.
I think the original stigma is the way it is here. It's the parents taking care of the kid, whereas the way it is elsewhere, it's the kids taking care of the parents. Mm-hmm. So it's that different viewpoint. We live multi-generationally. We didn't have childcare issues. We didn't have all these problems that I guess most other people faced. And because of that, we were both able to be free to make lots of money. So it worked out well. And I always look at this. I'm like, these problems are so easily solvable without government interference, but people just got to go do it and they won't. So that's a whole nother conversation to have. So that begs really the question is, can we be happy and wealthy?
I think for me, I define wealth a little differently. I mean, I guess I think of it a little differently. It depends on, I think, yes, you can be happy and wealthy. I think that it's being wealthy isn't a guarantee that you're going to be happy. I think it can go in a very different direction where you become a miser, alone with your pot of gold, hoarding it, afraid to leave because someone's going to steal it from you, and just solely focused on it. But I also think, we want money because it's a gateway it's the tool, the means of exchange we've all agreed on to meet our needs. And, for a wealthy life, money doesn't actually always get us all the things that really, if we really slowed down and thought each individually, what does a wealthy life look like to me? Money isn't always going to correlate to all of those things. It certainly provides a foundation, kind of like the solid base to work off of, but it's not necessarily a guarantee that money is happiness.
No, it doesn't. I know lots of people who have lots of money and are very unhappy. And I think you said you look at it differently. And part of it is also just the way you live, which is finding, you use the word balance with money and making the world a better place. And I think that kind of goes into what you were alluding to, which is non-monetary forms of wealth. So can you expand upon that a little bit?
Sure. There's this idea that I talk about as the multiple forms of capital. And it's not an idea that's original to me. It's been written about, by various people calling it various things. But it's this idea that, so yes, there is financial capital, and that's the form of capital we in our current social and economic context know and utilize as our means of exchange. So, cash, currency, Bitcoin, our Wall Street investments, those are all examples of financial capital. But we can also think about material capital. That's another form of capital. So that's the computers we're both using right now, our microphones, our cars, our houses, the physical structures in our life, the tools that a plumber uses to do their job or a jewelry maker uses to do their job, the tractor on the farm. These are material forms of capital. There's also living or natural capital. And so especially for someone like me who's very, thinking a lot about the environment and wanting to be more connected to nature and growing my own food, we can think of the fruit trees, in my neighborhood or that I might plant in my yard, the garden I might grow, but it's also our community parks. It's the rivers, all of this living and natural capital we have around us. There's also intellectual capital. So all of those books on those shelves behind you are full of knowledge and wisdom and help you increase your intellectual capital, our creativity, our innovation, our resourcefulness. These are all examples of intellectual capital. And then there's experiential capital. So that's the capital. So say, for example, you read in one of your books about how to fix a bicycle tire, when you have a flat tire, how to repair it. But then you go out and you actually repair that tire. So then you gain that experiential capital of actually doing it. When you cook a meal, doing things, this is gaining the experiential capital. So cooking the meal as opposed to just reading the recipe in the book or reading an article about food. That tangible hands-on activity is the experiential capital when you gain the knowledge and you actually physically know how to do something. Another form of capital is spiritual capital. So, if we're thinking about richer soul, that's an important form of capital too. And that doesn't necessarily have to be a religious faith. It could be a meditation practice, a yoga practice, how you kind of ground and center yourself in the universe is spiritual capital. Then we have cultural capital. So that's culture, the capital that we kind of create together in smaller groups. It's our common history, art, films, music, the food, different ethnic foods. These are all forms of capital. And then there's social capital, which is our network of the people we know. It's our family, our friends, it's the people we know through, if we do belong to a church or, our different volunteer activities, different groups, our neighbors, our community. And this is a really important form of capital, in terms of, I think, with what we see happening with so many people feeling isolated and depressed. And I talk a lot about resilience. How can people feel more resilient given all that's going on around them? And I think connections to others is very important to that. And a more concrete example of social capital could be, for example, if someone loses a job, and then they put a post on Facebook or something, announcing that they've lost a job, circulating their resume, and then by all of this activity within their networks, they're able to get a new job. So they've tapped their social capital. And those are the 8 most commonly discussed forms of capital. But I also think in terms of, for example, time as a form of capital. Time's a pretty non-renewable resource. And when we look at a lot of the happiness research, what really makes people happy is having autonomy over how they choose to use their time. So there's a lot of wealth to be had in our time. And similarly, attention capital, as we've seen Mark Zuckerberg and so many others earning millions and billions of dollars off of our attention, we can be more thoughtful about what we direct our attention to. Is it adding value to our lives, what we're directing our attention to? Is it depleting us? Is it having a positive or a negative impact? Could we, not to overemphasize being productive, but I do think that we can use our attention capital more wisely, because I think we especially as it relates to social media, we just become consumers of content and our time dissipates. And we could be, focusing our attention either on content that is, helping us gain new skills so that we can get more experiential capital, or just gain skills so that we don't have to spend as much money to meet our needs. And then the last form of capital I would mention is health. And we've kind of already alluded to this, that physical and emotional health are tremendous forms of capital. And I think they're the foundation for everything else, because without them, it's hard to pursue the others.
It's so true. And you use the word capital, and we just talk about some of those same things as just the core values that we talk about here. And it's funny how they all tie together in certain ways, in the sense of, if you have time, you can cook your own meals, which will improve your health and save you a ton of money. And if you lived in a multi-generational house, then you'd have the help to be able to do more of these things, and these skills would be passed down. Because I think that's the biggest problem today. I don't know that a lot of young people even know how to cook.
I think young people, and I've had young people say it to me, whether it's cooking, repair skills, just basic skills, they don't have them. And some of them are concerned about it, and I think they're trying to do more. But yes, it's so important, and it does save us money. I could take this in a couple different ways. There are a couple thoughts I want to make sure I get out here. For me, the money is the least creative albeit the most convenient way we can meet our needs. And I get that, we have to pay our bills and that we have a distressing economic reality for many people. But when we can slow down and give ourselves the space to tap our mind, our creativity, our resourcefulness, we can come up with some pretty amazing solutions that are, for me, it's the trifecta bonus of they can save us money, they're often better for the environment, and there's this self-actualization aspect of meeting your own needs and solving your problems and having that satisfaction of figuring things out. And I think that anything people can do to even give themselves 1 to 5 minutes here and there to just try and find space to pursue creative solutions, even if it just starts with opening up Google next time you need something and putting DIY plus whatever it is you need, to start there. Is there, because if you're going to make it, you're going to get that experiential capital making it, and you're going to save money, and then you're going to have that satisfaction of doing it. And it makes me so sad and frustrated sometimes, but I get it, that we're being robbed of these opportunities we have this unlimited human potential. And if we feel like we have to go meet our needs with money because we don't have time to think of other solutions, we miss those beautiful opportunities.
Today's episode is sponsored by Profit Answer Man Podcast. Did you know that most small business owners hate looking at their financials? It's one reason they may struggle with business success. The Profit Answer Man podcast helps them ensure they are profitable and can pay their employees and weather the storms we all have to face. It's built on the Profit First methodology of pay yourself first. The Profit Answer Man podcast is a must listen to for every small business owner and anyone who wants to help them survive and thrive. Check it out on your favorite listening platform. And there is a lot of satisfaction that comes with doing it yourself. I mean, you can easily spend money to have somebody do something for you, and it's nice and it's whatever. But when you actually do it yourself, it's a whole different feeling. It's a whole different way to do it. And I guess now that we're talking about this, I guess I'm lucky in that sense. I don't do it as much anymore just because, well, I'm older and more tired. I don't want to get on the floor and lay flooring like I used to. But we've done it all. Like literally, we've electric, we've done plumbing, and I've learned to let go of some of those things only because it's someone else's time to do it. But I know how to do most of those things. And so it's allowed me to save money because I didn't have to spend thousands of dollars for things that honestly weren't that difficult to do.
That's great. I think I try to think about how can I bypass money to meet my needs? How can I be creative to do it? And when I talk about these multiple forms of capital, I talk about them as the ultimate hedge against inflation, because the more you can go directly to those forms of capital without using financial capital, you're much less impacted by inflation.
So on my other podcast, we talk to business owners, and we have a closing line, which is you don't need more resources. You need to be more resourceful. Because I think business owners especially throw money at every problem instead of actually trying to solve it. And at the end of the day, business owners are like people. And I guess you don't see it as much in personal, just probably because I don't dig into people's finances, but I see it all the time in business, and it probably flows through. If you actually think through how to do stuff, there are ways to do things without spending money. And I think for us, I know we've kind of taken a turn back throughout the 60s into the 70s and the 80s. You needed 50 million different cleaning solutions for now I'm like, you know what? We have vinegar. Why do I need all this stuff? Like vinegar comes for $2 for 2 gallons. Like, it works great. Why do we have all these other things? Why do I need this and this and this stacking up my whole life? If you just go back to simples and basics, I think people have forgotten.
Are you familiar with Scott Schonenshine's book, Stretch? I think you would appreciate this one it's not very well known, but the subtitle is Unlock the Power of Less and Achieve More Than You Ever Imagined. And he is, I believe, a business professor at a university, I forget which one, in Texas. But he uses a lot of business examples, but it's also about the individual as well. And he talks about people as chasers and stretchers. And the chasers are the ones that want to keep up with the Joneses. They think they need more resources to accomplish things. And the stretchers are those that are more inclined to, look at the resources they have at hand and try to do more with them.
Interesting. I have not heard of that book, but I pretty much will. I think I agree with that. And I think for us, the reason I learned that way is because when we were young, we didn't have the resources. So if you wanted stuff, you learned how to do it yourself, and that's just what it is. And most things aren't that difficult to do. With a little, especially now with YouTube, you can figure everything out. It's not that hard to do it. And people just need to get back to doing it, I guess.
I was just going to say, I do think, yes, YouTube is very helpful in this. And again, I will say, from my perspective, I think it's more and more important for people to do this just because of the going back to that word resilience aspect, resilience again. I think that's, and I hope more young people will hear this and take action to start learning these skills.
Hopefully they will. Again, there's also that, I don't know, is there social pressure to pay people to do things? To say, why are you wasting your time?
Maybe in some circles, that's certainly not
in yours.
Not in mine. I landed in a very like-minded place here.
So let's talk a little bit about that. A big part of what you talk about is permaculture.
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain what this is and what you mean by that word?
Sure. I describe permaculture as an ecological designer's toolkit. And permaculture looks to nature's closed loop, no waste, abundance-based system as the model. So when you look at a forest or you look at ecosystems, they're constantly enriching themselves through synergistic relationships and interactions. So how do we bring that into, our human, and we're part of ecosystems as humans, but, in our day-to-day lives and these various elements of our lives. And so most people, if they are familiar with permaculture, know it through it being applied in landscapes and people wanting to establish food forests or grow more of their own food. Or maybe, in the built environment when they're trying to create off-grid homes or tiny homes or straw bale homes or off-grid living. But it is a toolkit that can be, again, applied to much more. And so when I took my permaculture designer's course, I was really focused on and curious about the finance and economics petal of the permaculture flower. And that is the rabbit hole I've chosen to dive down. We can talk about permaculture and governance, applying it to how we choose, what structures we choose to set up for governance in society. We can talk about it in our, how do we apply it in our spiritual lives, in our connections with others. But again, I wanted to go more into thinking about permaculture and money and wealth building. And again, for me, when I talk about wealth building, yes, money's part of it, but if my goal is to have money to get these other forms of capital, again, I'm not saying I don't want to have a source of money saved up, but I also want to be thinking about wealth more broadly.
And I mean, that was the original tagline. I don't always say it. You got rich, now what? Because I think people chase the money. They expect it to bring everything. And then they're like, oh, that didn't work.
Yeah.
Now what? And I think your way of doing it is much, much better. Can you give us some examples of how to be more resourceful in daily life?
I think just even slowing down and practicing looking at the things around you and thinking about what else you might be able to use them for, being someone who loves the outdoors and nature, even just here in my yard. So let me back up and give this example. When I first bought this house, needed a shower curtain rod. And I didn't want to buy another plastic or metal item that was eventually going to go to a landfill. And so I tried to find a shower curtain rod at thrift stores, at yard sales, but I wasn't finding anything that fit my needs. And then one day I was looking out my window and I looked again at this beautiful slender clump of bamboo that grows in my yard. And all of a sudden I had this free, beautiful, renewable, sustainable source of shower curtain rods from a plant that grows in my yard and needs to be maintained anyways. So it was just having that space to have that aha moment. There is another tree in my neighbor's yard that overhangs mine that many Indians know as jamun plum. It's also known as Java plum. It's not that common, but I'm in Florida. And this is almost a nuisance tree here in Florida. It's considered an invasive. And it produces this purple fruit once a year that drops on sidewalks and annoys people. But if you get it at just the right time, it tastes pretty good. And they litter the alleys around here. But this whole tree, the fruit, the leaves, the bark, the wood is highly medicinal. It's very good for controlling diabetes and blood sugar level and many other things. And no one around here is doing anything with this tree. You can make vinegar with the fruit, you can make tea, you can make all kinds of medicinal products. And I think, with the growing interest in holistic health and herbal medicine, that there's just this opportunity waiting in this nuisance tree. But it, just took me seeing this tree all the time and being like, what else could I do with it? And looking up online, what are people making with this tree or things from this tree?
And honestly, you could get free cost of goods, right? Mm-hmm. So it's an opportunity to even make a little bit of money within that.
Precisely. So another example, I am an avid dumpster diver and I do it, kind of as a carbon offset. So that if I'm out in my car, if I rescue something from the waste stream, it feels like, I am reducing my negative impact on the planet. And I ride my bike a lot and I keep a trash grabbing stick in my bike so I can be pulling things out of the dumpster or just keeping my eye out for what's along the sidewalk. But I've also, I've gone to university dumpsters, thrift store dumpsters, and other dumpsters. But in 1 year, I earned several $1,000s selling things that I had rescued from the waste stream.
And I think, in the suburbs, that's more the case. What I've learned, like in New York City, it is so hard to get rid of stuff that literally there's apps where people put stuff out and say, hey, this is here. And somebody else comes along and takes it because there is need. And because they're all so close and there's no easy way to get rid of it, that's the case. The other day I drove by a local hotel and literally outside there was like 4 dumpsters full of couches and beds. And I guess they're renovating. And that's the problem. Everything gets chucked. We've turned into a throwaway society.
Yes. And I say that there is no such thing as waste. There are only poorly designed systems and misdirected resources. and lots of missed opportunity.
Well, I am from India, and India, like literally, this is what happens. Every level of economic work finds their place, and they tend to reuse things and recycle or redo it. In America, that's not socially acceptable. Unfortunately, everyone has to have the best. And so we have gotten rid of that whole system. And that probably comes down to something that you talk about in your book, which started probably back in the 20s and the 30s. You talk about the Wendigo economy. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Sure, I'll do my best. Now, that is a part that my co-author wrote. So it's this, it's something from indigenous cultures, this concept of, just getting wrapped up in the pursuit of more, and then eventually consuming everything that's dear to us. At some point, especially on a finite planet, we have to think about that. And so it's, again, really reeling it back to what is important to us. I think for me, it always starts for people with getting clear on what a wealthy life looks like to them. That's where your design project starts, because permaculture is a designer's toolkit. It's a design process. So, what does a wealthy life look like to you? And then how do you design your life to, include those elements? And so it's not going insatiably beyond that to this Wendigo culture that is going to potentially eventually destroy all that you're trying to build for yourself.
And I think as part of that chapter, they also talked about planned obsolescence. Mm-hmm. And you see that, because I remember as a kid, people just didn't renovate their houses because they were 10 or 15 years old. Nowadays, people are constantly doing that. Back then, you kept stuff for 30, 40, 50 years, and it lasted for 30, 40, 50 years. And as long as it worked, it was like, well, why do I need to replace it? And I think that has consistently changed, where now they just want to keep the consumer dissatisfied so that you're constantly replacing.
Well, yes, there's that. There is this media effort to make us think that we need to buy the latest things, to keep up our social standing. But there is also products are being made to last less time. They don't last as long. You're forced to buy things, or you can't repair them, or they stop selling the parts, or they stop providing the updates, or whatever the technical term is for the software. At some point they're not going to support it any longer. And so it comes from multiple directions.
Apple is amazingly good at obsoleting their products, even when they work.
Yes.
And it's amazing how much has been used up because of that. And we've become that throwaway culture too. People don't repair things anymore because, well, and for a while there, the cost of repair, things got so cheap that the cost of repair didn't make sense anymore. And technology has advanced tremendously. So people just find that there's newer, better. So why fix something when it breaks? And again, even the cost of repair parts has gotten astronomical for many, even automobiles. Like, I think you strip down a car, it's worth more stripped down than it is sold together. Although in today's economy, with everything that's happened, that probably has changed.
Yeah. Again, the experiential capital, to the extent that people can learn some basic repairs, it's not always going to be possible, but I do think that there are more things people can repair than they realize, and they don't need to be throwing away or upgrading everything they think they need to.
No, they don't. It's a choice, but you get social pressure when you don't. And you have to learn to say no to the social pressure, or surround yourself like you have with people who will give you the opposite social pressure, right?
Yes. Well, and you and I and others can be working in the background too to redefine rich. I think, that's a book I've read lately. I think this whole idea of, what does a rich life look like? When most people think about it for themselves, again, it's not the fast car or the big house that they have to keep clean and maintain and heat. It's not a yacht. It's these more meaningful parts of their lives. And so when people get clearer on that and can find people to surround themselves with that resonates with as well, then there doesn't have to be this focus on new, keeping up with the Joneses and what do people think.
So for me, I think a big part of wealth is time freedom. And that to me is the ultimate. I think as you get older, you start to realize that life is short. And if you own your own time, then life is a lot better, especially when you get to do what you want, how you want, when you want. And when you're stuck on somebody else's schedule, then all of these things become harder to do because you don't have the time to do them anymore.
Yes. Well, and speaking of time, this shifts us a little bit, but there's something I wanted to share with you that I think you and your audience will appreciate. Have you ever heard of a time bank?
I do not believe so.
Okay. So time banking is this concept where the currency is time, not money. And people around the world have started time banks in their communities, although not everyone has them. And the exchanges are conducted through a software. So, for example, I live in St. Petersburg, Florida, and we have the St. Pete Time Bank. And so if I have an exchange with someone, it doesn't mean that my next exchange is going to be them exchanging back with me. It's the exchange is logged in the software and everyone's time is valued equally. And so we can exchange goods and services through the time bank. So for example, I've given someone time credits for a really great sun hat. When I bought my house, it came with a lawnmower. And I ended up mulching most of my yard, so I didn't really need the lawnmower. So someone in the time bank, who's a friend of mine, keeps the lawnmower at her house, and every time she mows the lawn, she gives me time credits. I've used the time bank to get someone who has photography skills to come out and take pictures of me for social media. When the pandemic started, we put together a phone tree to call our elderly members of the time bank to check in on them. We've put together meal trains when people are sick. And so it's been a great source of connection and community. And again, resilience in a way, if I need something before I buy it, I'll ask in the time bank, does anyone have this sitting around their house that they're not using? And I can offer you time bank credits for it. And it's very easy to earn time bank credits. In fact, in our time bank, you can operate in a deficit. You don't, even if you were negative time credits, we want to create the connections in the community and the exchanges.
Does that require a certain kind of person? Because there has to be trust, right?
Certainly. I think it helps that it's local. And we do, especially before the pandemic, we had in-person events so you could get to know people. But you can, I guess it does. I've never thought about that because especially because the exchange is logged in the software. So it's not like I'm going to lose my time credits, I guess, and you could, if that was a concern, like when I got the sun hat, I could be on my phone as the person is giving me the sun hat, logging the exchange in the software because you can log in from anywhere. And the person could see, okay, yes, she's giving me the time credit. For me, especially because you can operate in a deficit, I don't have to have the trust level to the same extent because I'll still be able to participate in the time bank, even if an exchange is logged incorrectly.
I just meant more so you get people who take and don't give, and so they go well into the negative. So as long as you have a floor.
Yeah, I don't think there's that much of that going on. I mean, our time bank is still small enough. Yeah, I suppose if it got big, that could be more of a concern. But because you're always getting time credits in exchange, you personally aren't going to be negatively impacted. But yes, I suppose someone could abuse it.
It's more the system than the actual. You see so much, or maybe it's because that's just what the news delivers. Bad instead of good, right?
Sure. Well, our time bank, I mean, I think people who gravitate towards it tend to be the ones who really want to participate in the exchanges and create community and connect with others.
And that makes a whole lot of sense. So we always start the show with money, and we're going to bring it back to that. And within the permaculture arena, how does investing and so forth kind of fit in?
Okay. It fits in a couple of ways. It fits in to some extent to the way, those of us, most people in personal finance think about it with financial investing in businesses and that type of thing. But it's, it starts with the discussion of maybe moving your money to, a socially conscious bank or into socially conscious mutual funds. For me, when I got to permaculture, I saw that as part of the discussion, but it still didn't feel aligned with what I wanted to be supporting because my money is still supporting single-use plastics and sugary beverages, banks with predatory lending practices. So I started looking around to learn more about what I could do as a non-accredited investor to move my money out of the stock market into more meaningful things. And what I learned about one thing was self-directed IRAs. And most people have never heard of this. And it certainly does take a bit more work and involvement with your investments. But a self-directed IRA, moving your money into it, allows you to direct your money into a much wider array of assets, beyond the stock market. So pretty much any legal investment other than, I think, collectibles like art and wine, insurance, and maybe S corporations. So, farmland. So some of the things I have invested in, a regenerative farm, a permaculture farm in my area. I own an ownership share that I was able to direct my money into through my self-directed IRA. I've found startups on crowdfunding websites that feel like they're aligned with what I want to be supporting. So a Native American food business, a loan to a low-income marginalized community that was trying to do something to improve the economics in the area. I invested in an organic food business. Through these websites, there are more and more opportunities and platforms. There's a platform called Steward where you can make loans to regenerative farmers. And I just started learning about those things. So that, in terms of the financial investing, that would be, what permaculture talks about. But there's also just this way of thinking about assets and investing in assets, again, like the food forest or these tools and skills and setting up these streams of income and it's talked about in personal finance, but, thinking about, are you putting your money into an asset or a liability? It's just that the assets we're thinking about from a permaculture perspective are going to be these regenerative assets that are going to be restoring and renewing, our depleted planet, depleted people, and then being able to build an income and community and improving your community through these investments. I just want to say that also, so a big question for me is always, why is it easier to send our money off to Wall Street than it is to invest in Main Street? Local investing is a big part of this permaculture approach to thinking about wealth. How do we build wealth locally in our communities to uplift our communities?
And this is something I don't think people realize. When you buy a company on Wall Street, you're paying 15, 20, 50, 100 times earnings. When you buy a company on Main Street, you can buy it for 3 or 4 or 5 times earnings. Like, you get so much more value in doing that than you do in buying on Wall Street. So you can do what's right and make more money. So they kind of go together. Real quick, and we've covered a lot of what's in your book, but can you just take a minute and tell us a little bit about the book? It's called Growing Free, Financially Resilient and Economically Empowered, Building Regenerative Wealth Without Losing Your Soul or Destroying the Planet.
Yes, it's a lifestyle design book, because money is a lifestyle design tool, but it's how to design your life to be financially viable, doing things that you want to be doing, that uplift your community and won't leave you broke in the gutter.
Well, and I think that's one of the things, as everyone is looking around, clearly inflation is here. It's going to stick around for a while. And a lot of these things are just ways to enjoy a nicer life without having to struggle and being stuck with everything going up astronomically. You can be more resourceful, right? Which is what we talked about, and find an easier way to get what you want and to live well within your means and to probably live better.
Yes. And I heard that you have an upcoming podcast. I imagine it will be live by the time mine goes live, on creativity, being creative. So hopefully these two will complement each other, these 2 episodes.
Yeah, that one is on. I think that's the one on core creativity.
I think so. I just said it was coming up, so I haven't heard it.
We have one on core creativity that's coming up. And the way, I think this is the thing people need to realize. The world's going to change again. And this time it's going to change in a different way. And I think it's going to be a more human-centric way. And these types of things are going to come back to the forefront as people realized they were over-marketed to, and it's all hype and it's not for real. And so it's a great way to learn how to get back to nature. And I think COVID helped push people back to nature. I still see people walking all the time that didn't do that pre the pandemic. I think people have learned to realize that, hey, there is another way to living life. And so let's go live it that way. It's time to learn the secrets of life. What's your secret to living an abundant life?
Those multiple forms of capital.
Hey, nothing like having capital to live an abundant life. What did you learn later in life that you wish you would have learned sooner?
That people who didn't necessarily do well in our school system, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're not smart and they don't have skills and talents and things to offer us.
School is designed for a certain kind of person, and it's not designed to make you creative, and it's not designed to make you wealthy. There are certain programs that will, but that's not the core for most people. If you were to give an 18-year-old one specific piece of wisdom, what would it be?
Question the mainstream narrative.
You might have to question your parents too, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's okay. If people would like to learn more about you, the book, what's the best way for them to do that?
My website, richandresilientliving.com. There is a shop section on the website, and you can find that book and my courses there as well.
Awesome. And we'll make sure to put that in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Rocky, for hosting this conversation.
So this begs the question, how can you be more resourceful? Can you change your life to dramatically lower your cost of living while increasing your enjoyment? Time is capital, and it's the one resource we can never recover. And it's the one we tend to give away without regard, whether it's being hooked on social media or being too tired to spend time doing what we love. So, what changes can we make to improve and grow the many forms of capital that Laura talked about today? It's going to be different for each of us. It's going to be what works for us. Do you know someone who would benefit from listening to this episode? Would you do me a favor and share it with them? I'd appreciate that. Thank you. And next week, we've got David Tate on to talk about conscious accountability. Thanks for listening. Have an abundant week.